talk about managing climate risks moving forward before I talk about what those are. It's really clear that the best way to think about climate change impacts is to think about them in the context of risk. And there are at least 5 reasons it's useful to think about climate change impacts in the context of risk. The first is that in a changing climate, we're going to see many of the kinds of things we see now: heat waves, severe storms, coastal floods, hurricanes. But we're going to see a different frequency and a different pattern of them. When you think about risk, you can think about connecting the responses to current variability with the things we'll see in the future. And well, a second reason is that most of the impacts from a changing climate are going to occur in extremes. It's going to be the hottest days, the highest tides, the strongest winds. Whether or not climate change actually changes the strength of those things, where things break in a changing climate is where you're in extremes. And we should recognize that when we want to understand the risk, we need to understand the risk from the extremes. A third reason we want to be really clear about understanding climate change challenge and managing risks is that we want to be focused on the full range of possible outcomes. The scientific community has invested vast resources in understanding the most likely outcomes of climate change, and I'm sure you've heard temperature projections, which give a central projection. But in general, we care very little about the central projections in an environment with risk. When you get in your car and you're happy that you have car insurance, seatbelts, and anti-lock brakes, it's not because you expect to have an accident. It's because there is a full range of possibilities, and that full range of possibilities includes one where the seatbelts, the airbags, the anti-lock brakes could potentially make a difference. So with climate, we want to recognize that even though we have a pretty good understanding of the most likely outcomes, where things really are likely to matter is at the extremes, and we want to make sure that we're sensitive to understanding the consequences of being at the extremes. A fourth reason it's really important to think about climate change as a challenge in managing risk is sort of a good news story, and it's that we already have a wide range of sophisticated tools that we use every day for managing risk. These are tools that are available from the scale of the family to the firm to the government. At the family, it's investments in home insurance, safe vehicles, things like early warning. At the level of the firm, it's hedging your investment portfolio, thinking about depreciation schedules of infrastructure. And at the level of government, it's things like investments in national security, thinking about the time scale of infrastructure. Lots and lots of sophisticated thinking at all levels in society already goes into managing risk. That's exactly the thinking we need to be successful in dealing with climate change. And then a final reason that I think it's really critical to recognize that climate change challenge in managing risk is that climate change in general doesn't introduce dramatically new kinds of problems. What climate change tends to do is add new dimensions, new complexities, and new probabilities to problems that we already face. Problems with severe storms, high temperatures, sea level associated events. And so what we need to recognize in that context is that climate change isn't kind of a new player on the horizon. It's more of a threat multiplier. And as a threat multiplier, we need to think harder about the kinds of solutions that we already apply in terms of protecting societies with early warning systems, with good investments in infrastructure for providing emergency services, and with thoughtful responses to disasters. So from that perspective, climate change looks in some ways more challenging, but in many ways much more manageable. It's a continuum with things that we've already done.